Thank you everyone for being with us. Pci Technology has partnered with Terra Verde for today's webinar on the topic of hotel guest data security. Data security is an increasingly critical concern for hoteliers. And while it's crucial to have PCI compliant technology partners like Pci Technology at your hotel, there can be things your staff is doing that can still make your guest data vulnerable. Today we have partnered with guest data security experts at Terra Verde to teach you how to best protect that guest data. In this webinar, we will share 3 things to look for and stop right now, review recent changes to PCI compliance, and learn which self-assessment questionnaire is right for you. My name is Joshua Molina, and I will be your host today. I am joined by data security expert Ed Vasco, who is the CEO of Terra Verde. Ed is a successive entrepreneur with almost 30 years of experience in the cybersecurity industry. He is currently the co-founder and CEO of Terra Verde, one of Arizona's largest providers of cybersecurity services and solutions with over 1,500 active clients around the world. He has started and successfully run 5 businesses in his career, and his extensive experience in cybersecurity provides him deep expertise to help organizations of all sizes in securing their critical data and infrastructure. He is also an appointed commissioner of Arizona's Commission for Post-Secondary Education and actively works with public and private universities around the state to produce the next generation of Arizona's cybersecurity workforce. Before we hear from Ed, I want to remind you that we welcome your questions. If you have a question, please type it into the WebEx chat bar under Q&A so we can see your questions. I now want to welcome Ed to the webinar. Ed, thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Joshua. I really appreciate it. Good morning or good afternoon, everybody. I really do appreciate the time that we're going to spend here, and I hope that what we present here will be very useful and helpful to you in not only achieving PCI compliance, but maintaining it going forward. If we go, let me go ahead and present the agenda here. We really have a couple of key issues that we want to talk about today, as Joshua mentioned. We want to talk about the with our hotelier clients, that we want to make certain we're getting the word out that these are practices that oftentimes are meant to be things that enable, but ultimately will create significant risk for you. We want to make certain that you're understanding those and getting a chance to stop them. We also want to talk about some of the more recent changes that have occurred to the PCI data security standard, or Pci Dss. These deadlines are likely impacting you and your individual hotels. And then, as Josh said, we're going to spend some time talking about the specific self-assessment questionnaires that may be right for you, and then I'll be happy to answer any sort of questions that you might happen to have. If we move on, I want to take just a pause and tell you a little bit about ourselves as a company. Terra Verde has been in business 10 years. We were founded in 2008. And I'm proud to say that we've been working very actively in the small to medium-sized business community throughout our 10-year experience. We've grown to be one of the nation's largest cybersecurity companies, and really focus in on helping organizations understand how to reduce their risk in very pragmatic, business effective ways. Over the years, we've grown and innovated and launched a number of different products that support the small to medium-sized business community, because that's really where we see most of the risk and most of the impact is in small to medium-sized businesses. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right on in and talk about the 3 key things that I would recommend all organizations take the time to make changes now, especially in the hotel industry. The first key item is around credit card authorization forms. I mean, our perspective really is that if you're taking those cards and card authorization forms, what you need to be able to do is very, very quickly remove them. We'll get into some more details here, but at the end of the day, if we click next there, Josh, yeah, thanks. The other key item there is taking credit cards via fax or email. Very, very easy thing to do. It's a very customer enabling type of approach. We see that within hoteliers all over the world, and really what we need to be able to start messaging, and I'll give you some very specific reasons here, but we really need to try to emphasize the need to stop taking those credit cards via fax or email. It creates a significant amount of exposure and a significant amount of risk for your organizations. And then ultimately, while these are all items that are technology-driven, they're really people-oriented processes that need to stop. And the largest one that we see, and hotels are really being impacted by this in a significant way, is that classic call from the corporate help desk. You know, comes in at 1 o'clock in the morning to your third shift operator, and you know, they're saying, hey, we're here to help you, and we just need you to go ahead and log in or show us how to log into your computer. And really what that comes down to is if you're getting a call from somebody trying to spoof or social engineer as the corporate help desk or as the help desk, you need to make certain that your staff understands to go ahead and hang up that call. So if we click next, there you go, one more. There you go. So we're going to go take a deeper dive into each of these areas, and I'm going to explain to you some of the reasons why these are so important to change. And we're going to start in again with credit card authorization forms. These are, you know, classic paper-based and paper-driven modes of authorizing. You know, if I have an employee who's traveling to your hotel, it's a great opportunity for me to be able to say, hey, I want to be able to pay for that person's time, and in doing so, I fill out an authorization form. And inevitably, every single hotel, small to large, that I go to, there is typically some form of 3-ring binder in the back, or even up on the front desk that contains that month's or that quarter's credit card authorization forms. The real challenge associated with keeping those forms, especially in paper format, is that the PCI data security standard, if it has one key element that is sacrosanct, it is not to store what's called sensitive authentication data, or SAD. And that is really also, it's CVV2, it's the 3 to 4 digits that are associated with the back of the credit card. Or in the case of American Express, the front of the credit card. That sensitive authentication data, as a result of the fact that most credit card authorization forms wish to have a copy of the front and back of the card so that you can perform a card authorization with the, you know, kind of in a card not present but card present mode, allows significant risk, and it's an area where if a hotel experiences a breach, it's oftentimes one of the key areas where they're found not to be in compliance, because, again, the Pci Dss states in Section 3.2 that you're not supposed to store sensitive authentication data, even if it's encrypted in some format. And so our general recommendation is, while this credit card process is important, and you don't want to unenable or disable the ability for you know, a company to pay for an employee's room, or for a relative to pay for somebody else's room, you do want to make certain that once you have the authorization code from your credit card processing company, that you go ahead and destroy, shred, you know, light on fire, burn in a, you know, back room somewhere if need be, those papers, rather than storing them. The important thing here is storing them and holding on to them is causing significant risk and significant concern. It's risk in the sense that, you know, somebody could come in and grab that information, as, you know, if your front desk personnel or back office personnel are not available, and somebody's able to get physical access to those 3-ring binders, they can take that information, sell it on the dark web, and now have significant amounts of information to be able to leverage in stealing somebody's identity. So first key thing is, as I said, get rid of the forms, shred them, destroy them once you have an authorization code. If we move on to the next item here, that's really taking credit cards via fax or email. This is a classic situation. It's very, very difficult to prevent, in the sense that, you know, all too often I've seen, you know, I've seen hotels receive emails from guests simply saying, hey, I have a reservation. Here's all my credit card information. I need to cancel my reservation. And all too often that that flow of information comes on in, and the challenge, of course, is that when you receive credit card information of any kind, it impacts your cardholder data environment, or CDE, and that's a critical area where credit card information is obtained, stored, processed, or transmitted. And what you're doing by receiving credit cards via fax or email is you're actually exposing what are called alternative channels for maintaining PCI compliance. And what we're really trying to do within the PCI space is we're really trying to reduce the scope. The whole point of PCI is to try to reduce the scope to its narrowest amount of systems, the smallest amount of environments possible. And when you're receiving, credit cards via fax or email, suddenly you're exposing a channel of communication that now needs to have a significant number of controls put in place around it. And email in particular is one where it's oftentimes very, very difficult to secure to the PCI data security standards requirements. It's very, very difficult to try to secure email to that point, and it creates a significant amount of challenges for hoteliers. So our recommendation is typically, if you absolutely decide that you need to do this, be prepared for a significant increase in cost around your PCI Dss compliance. If you can, we would recommend instead educating your guests not to send any sort of credit card via fax or email, even if it's a newsletter, a corporate newsletter, or a site newsletter that goes out to your guests, indicating to them, please don't send us this information via fax or email. It's for your own good not to do that. Respect the necessary channels that we have to collect your credit card. Use your reservation number versus your credit card, and that's a much easier approach for that communication, and it doesn't then require the level of security that the PCI Dss calls for. So if we move on to the third key item, and that is really a vector of attack that most hotels are dealing with in significant ways right now, and that is the classic social engineering by malicious actors that are on a worldwide basis calling in and targeting hotels. All too often, and I'm sure many people on this webinar, attending this webinar, have had this happen, or your third shift front desk personnel or back office personnel receive a call indicating that the caller is from corporate or from the IT help desk, and they're needing to get access to the system, and they need to check to make certain things are patched and so forth. So they're very convincing in their approach, and they talk in a significant amount of technical speak, and oftentimes convince front desk staff or back office staff to go ahead and initiate a shared desktop. So sharing the desktop and showing what's on that desktop allows an external attacker very easy access to what's there and what sort of data is available. It also allows for them to much more easily install malware and create opportunities for exposure of critical data. And so really our key goal here is to educate and help the hospitality space understand that unless you're getting a specific call or you have a specific help desk number to call, if you're getting a call from corporate help desk, or you're getting a call from IT, or you're getting a call from somebody that appears to be an authority, we highly recommend that your staff is aware and educated to the fact that they should just not take those calls, or instead they should have a list of numbers that they should initiate calls to in order to validate that this call is actually from the corporate help desk. We don't want to get in the way of the appropriate process, and certainly if there's an issue within your hotel, we want to make certain that people are taking care of it. But there are very effective ways that your corporate facilities and corporate IT departments can be helping by saying, here, call this number, and that's a valid number to call into and check to make certain that what needs to be taken care of can be taken care of, and that ultimately your hotel is not subject to being socially engineered by hackers. So what's the real impact? If we move on to here, I wanted to make certain that we were talking about the real impact, because while these three vectors can certainly reduce risk and really can help you reduce the scope of PCI, the real impact to small to medium-sized businesses is still very, very significant. And I think it's very appropriate that we take a few minutes here to talk about what the cost and risk landscape looks like. In particular, number of different surveys, number of different studies that have been put forward really classify the type of impact. And I think more than anything else, the challenge that we've seen small businesses and medium-sized businesses deal with is the financial cost. Very, very difficult to avoid the fines or avoid some type of hard dollar cost if you have been breached. And typically, on average, the cost of small businesses is as high as $21,000. Can be significantly more. We have seen forensic investigations ourselves in small single-site hoteliers that have exceeded 6 figures in size because of the number of cards that have been exposed, the type of exposure, and just the type of cleanup costs that are associated with trying to fix your environment to make it both be in compliance with regulatory requirements like Pci Dss, but also just the notification cost and the ongoing security control costs can be very, very high as a result of a breach. And all too often, what most organizations nowadays and most small to medium-sized businesses are dealing with is a need to transform many of their security controls away from just simply having antivirus and firewalls. Those were great technologies back in the 20th century. Nowadays, though, many small businesses lack the key controls to really help protect themselves in the 21st century, and that includes anti-phishing email measures. It includes anti-ransomware, anti-cryptoware. That's running rampant through organizations now. We see that, all too often in front page of the Wall Street Journal, nearly on a daily basis, if not weekly basis, that businesses have been subjected to ransomware attacks and having to pay with Bitcoin and so forth. Really, what it comes down to, I mentioned, is the ability to defend your organization and the data that you've been entrusted with against 21st century styled attacks, and not relying upon just antivirus and firewalls to protect you anymore. So let's move on into what's some of the financial and reputational impacts. We talked about the $21,000 cost on average, but the challenge that most organizations and studies have put the number somewhere between 60 and 85% of small businesses, once a breach has occurred, and depending upon the impact of the breach and the level of breach, once a breach has occurred, the ability for that small to medium business to really be able to maintain and survive that kind of breach after 12 months is very, very low. 60 to 85% of businesses go out of business once they've had a breach of some form. So our goal is really to help educate and to help businesses protect themselves with pragmatic approaches to deal with not only credit card risk but general cybersecurity risk, and in doing so reduce the likelihood that if a breach occurs, you're going to go out of business because you'll have the necessary controls and things in place to protect yourselves. All too often, though, when a breach has occurred without having, in particular, the three items I just mentioned in place, stopping credit card authorization forms, stopping those calls from the corporate help desk and educating your staff to not take those calls, and stopping credit cards via fax or email. Those three vectors ultimately create significant risk and are opportunities for the credit card companies when they come in to do a forensic investigation of a breached hotel to find that they weren't in compliance with the Pci Dss, with the data security standard. And so as a result of that, the fines get passed to the merchant, the fines get passed to your hotel, as well as the cleanup costs and the actual forensic investigation costs get passed to your hotel. So the $21,000 I mentioned, is on average, but as I also said, we see and have seen hotels be impacted to the tune of 6 figures, and it ultimately results in them going out of business within 12 months. So now that I've had a chance to scare you, let's talk a little bit about achieving PCI compliance, because all too often what we see with organizations is that there's a lack of knowledge around what the data security standard really calls for. And what it's calling for is not necessarily onerous, but it can be challenging to achieve and maintain. And so there are really 2 key steps involved with achieving PCI compliance. And the first key step is understanding where your cardholder data resides. I mentioned this before, your cardholder data environment, and understanding that is so important to putting in place the right kinds of controls. And that goes to the second step here, and it's really building out and achieving the 6 major objectives of the Pci Dss. It's building out a secure network and securing your systems that contain or are involved in your CDE. It's putting in place the necessary processes and necessary security to protect that cardholder data. And it's, if you continue on here, it's maintaining a vulnerability management program. It's also implementing strong access controls, meaning not just a user ID and password. We'll get into some of the changes that have occurred with the Pci Dss, but there's some new items that are impacting merchants of all sizes as it relates to access controls. The 5th element here is regularly monitor and test your networks. This is one where all too often small to medium-sized businesses of any industry, any merchant, tend to have difficulty with. It's the monitoring and testing of your network security and making certain that somebody's watching over your environment. And then finally, maintaining an information security policy and ensuring that your staff is aware of that policy. It does not have to be an onerous, tome of information. It doesn't have to be something that's hundreds of pages. Just something that essentially establishes your perspective on how to ensure that data is protected. Many organizations, Terra Verde included, have structures and capabilities to help organizations achieve and maintain these particular items across the DSS. I want to talk a little bit now about, in the next slide here, about some of the changes that have occurred recently as it relates to the Pci Dss, and in particular with Visa. Visa, MasterCard, American Express, Discover, so forth. Those are the major card brands behind the Pci data security standard. And Visa itself has led the way in making some specific changes. In 2017 in particular, they have pushed new reporting requirements, or I shouldn't even say push, that's probably not the right term. Better term is that they've suddenly required smaller merchants being level 4 merchants, those merchants that process up to 1 million Visa transactions annually. Those merchants, where most small to medium-sized businesses fall, have oftentimes not been a source of reporting and a source of information gathering by the data security standard, by the card brand. Their focus has been on the larger retailers, the Walmarts, the Targets, the Amazons of the world. And so Visa and now the other card brands are coming around to realizing that there's a need to focus in on the small merchants and the medium-sized merchants of the world, and make certain that they are just as in compliance as other larger merchants. These new requirements really, the key element here is that there's an annual validation to your acquiring bank, and there's an annual reporting to your acquiring bank. There's a lot of urban legend amongst many small merchants that you only have to report on PCI compliance once every few years, typically when you received a letter from your acquiring bank. And as a result of this change in 2017, all small merchants should be reporting to their acquiring bank around PCI compliance. The other key element that's occurred is the Pci Dss has continued to evolve and change. If we go to the next slide, is that on February 1st of this year, there's been two new, let me talk a little bit about the visa's requirements specifically for small businesses. My apologies. So as I mentioned, level 4 merchants, smaller merchants have to annually validate now starting in January of 2017 every single year, or there's an opportunity to also apply for and put in place Visa's Technology Innovation Program, or TIP. This involves putting in place the necessary EMV technology, and it's a strong recommendation by Terra Verde that you look to work with your acquiring bank for a point-to-point encryption solution, a P2PE solution. That kind of solution will help reduce your scope significantly. But the EMV technology, the card chip and chip plus signature technologies, if 75% of your transactions are originating through chip reading material or chip reading terminals, then the need to validate against on an annual basis against as a level 4 merchant can be removed. So you can actually reduce your reporting capability or reduce your reporting likelihood if you put in place and validated with your acquiring bank that you have and belong to the Visa TIP program. So there is an alternative method for level 4 merchants rather than reporting on an annual basis to move to the Visa TIP and reduce your reporting needs to your acquiring bank. That said, if we move on to the next slide, as of February 1st, 2018, there are a couple of new kinds of regulations that have occurred within the Pci Dss, two that are very impactful to small to medium-sized businesses, deal with the need to put in place change management process, essentially understanding when you make a change, what that change involves, and documenting those changes. Further, as I mentioned before, part of the core domains of the Pci Dss is around building out access controls and having secure access controls. The need for multi-factor authentication, in other words, having not just a user ID and password, but also having some sort of secondary authorization or secondary authentication method, like an SMS password or a password that comes through a different authentication vehicle. Could be through SMS, it could be through a mobile application, but some other form of authentication criteria is also now a requirement. And since the Pci Dss is driven not just from Visa, your acquiring bank, depending upon the number of transactions that are taken by, let's say, American Express or MasterCard, you may still have to report your Pci Dss certification and compliance state on an annual basis. So we want to make certain you're aware of these kinds of changes that are undergoing and are now required, irrespective of level of merchant. So these could be very impactful to your organization, and putting the documentation and those technical controls in place. If we move on to the next slide here, the key element here as it relates to PCI compliance is understanding that if you're going to be reporting to your acquiring bank, there are really two key things that are required for that reporting. First is some type of applicable self-assessment questionnaire, or SAQ. And the other thing is obtaining 4 clean quarterly approved scanning vendor, or ASV, network vulnerability scans. All too often, we see organizations getting one or the other in place. And so we want to make certain that everybody, we're taking the message out to the market to enable organizations to understand that both of these elements are what are required to your acquiring bank, not just the SAQ, and more importantly, which SAQ, but also ensuring that you have an approved scanning vendor and that you are completing 4 quarterly scans and clean scans for reporting purposes. We move on to the next slide. Some of the key items that we want to make certain that you're aware of is asking your acquiring bank which SAQ is required. There are a number, we'll get into the large number here of SAQs, they're self-assessment questionnaires that are available for merchants. And if you choose the wrong one, you could be creating a significant amount of work for yourself, and if you choose, or you could be choosing the wrong one and misreporting the size and extent of your cardholder data environment. And if there ever were a breach in your hotel or within your business, and forensic investigators came in to review that, and they saw that you had completed the wrong SAQ, you're no longer in compliance with PCI. So there's some significant challenges there around achieving and obtaining and maintaining PCI. And it's oftentimes very, very confusing for merchants because of the number of self-assessment questionnaires. So our first key point to merchants is to make certain you're asking your acquiring bank which SAQ is right for you based upon the terminals, based upon the channels of cards, card processing and card transmission that you are conducting at your hotel. If you're obtaining cards, again, via fax or email, that's one kind of channel. If you're obtaining credit cards via e-commerce through a registration page or a reservation page that you've set up or that your brand is set up, that's a different channel. And so it just depends upon the channels and the size and complexity of your environment. Most organizations have to go, are aligned with what's called the self-assessment questionnaire type D. This involves not just e-commerce, but also card-present transactions, and most merchants fall under the FAQ type D. The FAQ type D has 400 associated questions with it. It is oftentimes a very extensive and can be a very daunting task for business owners to fill out and complete, especially if they're not necessarily aware of all the technical requirements. And this creates its own set of issues for merchants. We have seen in the past merchants just simply answer yes because they wish not to answer no to their acquiring bank and say that they're not in compliance. So they answer yes to all 400 questions, and if a breach occurs and they've answered yes, they're then very quickly determined not to be in compliance because they did not, even though they've answered yes, those controls were not in place. So really, beyond the FAQ type D, let's take a look at the next slide here, because again, there are a number of other types of FAQs. There's the FAQ B, which is just using credit and debit terminals through phone lines. There's the FAQ B-IP, which is just using the internet. Again, credit and debit terminals using the internet. We've tried to provide, we've provided over here, what each equipment type, and then the associated self-assessment questionnaire, a quick description of what each of those SAQs involve. More than anything else, what I'd point you to is the number of questions. As I mentioned, the FAQ D is over 400 questions, and you can see here very quickly, the number of questions drop precipitously based upon the type of FAQ that your organization may have to fill out. Best thing to do is to check with your acquiring bank, make certain that they give you some form of letter or email indicating the proper FAQ to complete, and then go through that process. If you have any questions around that, be certain to reach out to both your acquiring bank, but then also organizations such as Terra Verde and others that are around the nation who are ready to help you with that. We've also included some helpful resources, if we go to the next slide here, Josh, that will hopefully give you some perspective around not just PCI, but the specific payment card brand requirements that are out there. So it's not just a matter of understanding the Pci Dss. We also highly encourage merchants to understand the specific kinds of changes that each of the card brands themselves are undertaking and pushing into the marketplace for their merchant communities. Those changes typically will then propagate eventually into the DSS in some form or fashion, but we highly recommend that merchants try to stay ahead of and aware of what's happening at the card brand level. So hopefully these elements have been very helpful. Again, please take to heart the 3 key methods of reducing your risk that we mentioned, understanding the changes that are occurring and that will continue to occur in the Pci Dss, and then ultimately understanding which FAQ is right for you. So appreciate the opportunity to chat with you today. I'm going to pass it back over to Joshua and see if there are any questions.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ed. Lots of great insight. I do have some questions already. Again, I want to remind you, if you have any questions for Ed, please type them into the chat bar, the Q&A chat bar on your screen. The first question I got, Ed, it says, what recourse do you have if a date is disputed, etc.? That form is our proof to dispute to the dispute team that authorization was given. What proof recourse do we have if that is destroyed?
So the key element there is the card being authorized by your acquiring bank. If the guest does not arrive or the reservation is then refuted or disputed in some form or fashion, ultimately the key element there is that we would recommend you have an authorization as part of your credit card authorization form. You maintain the reservation details and or you manually input the reservation information into your reservation system, but not necessarily hold on to the credit card components and the credit card pieces of that. The authorization code should act as your method of awareness to your acquiring bank, and then the proof of that would be maybe a secondary page of the form that has to be completed in association with the fact that the payee is asking for you to create a reservation for their guest, or your guest, the person that they're paying for those specific dates. That then also allows you to put a signature page on that form, but the key element here is getting rid of the credit card information and the SAD or SAD information that's oftentimes included on those forms. Instead, we would certainly recommend you hold on to the reservation details and also any sort of signature block that indicates that by signing this form, the payee is undertaking the reservation and the expectations of the reservation. And if they need to cancel, they cancel within your appropriate cancellation policy. That allows you then to have evidence to your acquiring bank to the fact that they've asked for this, they've agreed to it, and the fact that you've not held on to the credit card information post-authorization, it certainly helps you from a PCI compliance perspective.
Excellent, thanks, Ed. Another question from Raimi. She asks, how does the chip technology help if most reservations are made by phone?
Well, that's a great question, and certainly the Visa tip program is meant to be one where it's driven predominantly by card-present transactions. If you are taking credit cards by phone or by e-commerce related channels, the Visa tip program doesn't apply. But, you know, there are a large number of hoteliers that are still taking, you know, walk-ins, or they're taking credit card reservations at the front desk and not necessarily through an alternative channel. So they're doing it as card-present transactions. The other side of that is that having the ability to change the card on the folio is oftentimes done at the front desk, and so as a result, you know, enabling merchants to participate in the Visa tip program is a way to reduce the reporting requirements of merchants. But if you are taking credit cards over the phone, if you're taking credit cards via alternative channels, then you will have to be reporting on your PCI Dss compliance.
Great. Thank you so much, Ed. That's all the questions that we have right now. I do want to let our audience know we are offering a special offer for people that have registered for this webinar. It's a free hotel PCI compliance review. It's a complimentary PCI compliance review, $1,000 value. You'll also receive a 10% discount on any Terra Verde services or managed security solutions. So please go to skitest.tech/hotel security to sign up for this. Before we go, I just want to let you know about our upcoming webinar just a month away. The topic is on the power of the mobile PMS. You can register at the link on your screen, skitest.tech/mobile-PMS. And once again, a big thank you to our panelist, Ed Basco. I'll leave the info here for the special offer on your screen as we say goodbye. We thank you once again, Ed, and our audience for attending, and wish you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everybody.